If I had to give a name to my testimony, a title for what I would call it, it would be Falling into Grace. My name is Jesse Lazo, and this is how God saved me. One of the most important things about my life growing up was this weird balance of hating my dad and wanting his approval. My dad was a liar and a cheater, verbally abusive, an angry man, physically intimidating, would challenge his 12, 13-year-old sons, get in their faces, dare them to throw the first punch. If I had to put a name on the year 2014, it would be the year of depression. So I had been in a relationship with my girlfriend for 7 or 8 months at that point. I started to realize I was more similar to my dad than I would like to admit, and all these things started compounding and really driving me insane. And after one night of a really bad fight, I decided to hop in my car and go driving on the freeway. I was going 125 miles an hour down the freeway, and I was hoping that I would lose control of my car. I just needed a way to end it all, to stop feeling the way that I felt. Eventually, I calmed down and I went home. So we booked an appointment with a Christian counselor. And after a few sessions, he told me, if you want to progress any farther with this, you need to forgive your dad. And I told him I couldn't do that, and it ended there. Skip over the rest of 2014, and the bulk of our story comes on January 1st, 2015. It was the first day of the new year. My girlfriend and her family wanted to go watch the first sunset of the new year at a place called Sunset Cliffs. So the 5 of us go down to the cliffside to watch this first sunset. Her family decided that they wanted to go back up to the car, and I decided to go sit on the edge of the cliff and look over. And as I looked down, I saw about a 40-foot drop straight down to the rocks. So I stood up to get back away from the cliffs, and the cliffside actually crumbled underneath my feet. Just 40 feet of air to the rocks below. I tucked my right elbow and slammed into the ground, knocking me unconscious. Some time had passed and I came to again. I didn't know exactly where I was or how I had fell, but I started to scream for help, and it didn't seem like anybody heard me. Eventually, about 10 or 15 minutes passed. A couple people up the cliffside were looking over the cliff strangely and asked, "Hey, are you okay down there?" They called 911. They were going to have to call a helicopter to airlift me out, and then it was going to take about 45 minutes. I didn't know it at the time, but I had broken my elbow and the bone was sticking out of my arm. I looked to my left down south of the coast, and I saw a surfer. He just walked calmly up to me and knelt beside me. I looked up at him, and as soon as I looked at this man, this warmth came over my body where I was no longer cold. I was perfectly warm. I was not in any kind of pain. I felt totally fine, and I wasn't afraid at all. I had this peace that it was going to be okay. Eventually, the helicopter came, and they lowered down a gurney with a medic on it. So I had the surfer to the left of me and the gurney and the medic to the right, and they threw me onto the gurney, strapped me in, and began to hoist me up to the helicopter. Eventually I got to the hospital and they began surgery on my elbow. I was thanking the doctors so much for helping me. Eventually I got to a recovery room and I was surrounded by everybody that was with me at the cliff, and I had asked them, what happened to the man that was down at the bottom of the cliff with me? I want to tell him thank you. And they looked at me and they said, oh, don't worry, Jesse, you've already thanked him and his whole entire helicopter crew. You've thanked all of the doctors here. You've thanked all of the nurses. You've thanked everybody that you need to. And I said, no, not the helicopter guy, the surfer. What happened to him? And they all looked around kind of confused. I remember them looking at me and saying, Jesse, I don't know what you're talking about. We didn't take our eyes off you from the moment that we found you until a helicopter got there, and there's nobody down there with you. I found it kind of strange that I had seen somebody that apparently nobody else saw, and I asked my whole family to leave except for Josh. I told him, look, no one in the family knows that I have been struggling with depression. I've been on medication. I've been suicidal. I've not been living the way that a Christian should live, and if I would have died today, I think I would have gone to hell. Why did I see somebody that nobody else saw, and why am I still alive? And my brother looked at me and he said, I think God's giving you another chance to know him. So after getting out of the hospital, I was fairly curious about Jesus, but after a few weeks, that curiosity dissipated. I went back to my old life. I couldn't deny that something supernatural had happened, but that didn't mean that I necessarily wanted a relationship with Jesus all of a sudden. But slowly, these things started happening that were drawing me deeper and deeper into Christianity. And I had this dream where I was in downtown San Diego and I started to hear this roar, and from the side streets all these people started piling out running, and behind them were these torrents of water that were sweeping people away. And I started to run as well, but eventually the water caught up to me and tumbled me around. And when I stopped tumbling, I looked up and the whole entire earth was flooded with water. And I remember thinking, you survived a cliff and God gave you a second chance to know him. If only you had another chance, you would choose him. And I remember being woken up from that dream, and my girlfriend had just said, don't worry, Jesse, you're just having a bad dream. Go back to sleep. And so I tried to shrug it off, and I went back to sleep, and I had the exact same dream a second time. And so I woke up from that second dream, and there were things that needed to change. I started to go to a family Bible study. I began to find God occupying my thoughts. As I was driving, when I was sitting, when I was watching TV, whatever I was doing, God was there in the back of my mind tugging. And eventually I remember laying in bed in a house I didn't belong in, looking up thinking, God, I don't know how to pray, but I know I need to call out to you. I want to know you. How does this relationship start? I think in actuality it started months and months back as God began to pull me to himself and call me to himself. That night, August 19th, 2015, is when I consider myself to have been saved. There were a lot of things in my life that changed after becoming a Christian. There were some things that I stopped doing immediately. There were some things that took a while for me to stop doing, and there's some things that I still wrestle with. And I'm sure that there's more things that I don't even realize are a problem that one day God will reveal to me in his timing. But rather than focusing on the things that I stopped doing, I think it's more important to look at the change in my life that God brought in a positive way, the things I started wanting to do. I started to have these desires that were completely foreign to me beforehand. I had a desire to know God and be in relationship with him and obey him and respect him and love him and worship him. I began to have desires to share with others this good news that there is hope for those who struggle with depression. There is hope for those lost in sexual immorality. There is hope for those who feel hopeless. And his name is Jesus. And so I hope that my story of what God has done for me and how he's had mercy on me encourages you guys in your walk with God. And something that I'd like to point out too is that it doesn't matter if you've got this massive supernatural story of how God came into your life and saved you, or if he's kept you since you were a child and you never really had a straying away time. Any conversion is miraculous. It doesn't matter if you survived a cliff fall. It doesn't matter if Jesus himself came to you in a dream, right? Any conversion is miraculous. Turning from darkness to light, hating the things you once loved and loving the things that you once hated is miraculous. Believing in the man from Galilee who was crucified on a cross is miraculous. We're going to mess up time and time again. We never outgrow our need for the gospel. We never outgrow our need for grace. We continually fall into grace as we mess up time and time again, but we run to a Father who is forgiving, who is long-suffering and patient and kind to us, who understands our frame, that knows that we are dust,